Good evening, friends, and thank you for joining us for this evening of conversation with Ravi Agarwal. Thank you very much, Ravi, for being here with us today. Annie, can you go to the first slide? I'll just begin by introducing you all to the exhibition and project Collab. Collab is an inquiry into the many creative explorations from past archives and ongoing projects that reflects our environment's influence over us. From patterns that connect and soothe, it has transformed into conflicting forms and sounds that disturb and disengage, precisely representing our lost equation with nature. Collab, hosted by Sakshi Gallery, began on 14th May, representing 26 contemporary Indian artists. The online exhibition continues until 3rd June and can be viewed on the Sakshi Gallery website and social media platforms. So please do have a look. The discourse with the artists will continue and naturally materialize as a physical exhibition in due course of time, although these times are blurring the temporal, the virtual, and the ethereal. I'd like to take this moment and thank Geeta and the entire team of Sakshi Gallery for the support in putting this together. You guys have been great. Thank you. Next slide. As part of Collab's ongoing discourse pertaining the ecological dichotomy, I have invited today Ravi Agarwal, who has an interdisciplinary practice as an artist, photographer, environmental campaigner, writer, and curator. His work explores key contemporary questions of ecology, society, urban space, and capital. Photography has been a prime medium for him for over 4 decades, which has expanded over time to include video, public art, installations, and recently also printmaking. His key projects have long engagements for several years and are often accompanied by published diaries and writings. His work has been shown widely, including at the Yunchan Biennale, Kochi Muzris Biennale, the Sharjah Biennial, Documenta, amongst many others. He has co-curated the Yamuna Elbe project, Indo-German Twin City Public Art and Ecology project, and Embrace Our Rivers as Indo-European project in Chennai, and was the photography curator for the Serendipity Arts Festival in Goa. Ravi is also the founder director of the environmental NGO Toxics Link and has pioneered work in waste and chemicals in India. He serves on many policy and regulatory committees and boards and writes extensively on sustainability issues both academically as well as in the popular media, and has also co-edited several books. He was awarded the UN Special Recognition Award for Chemical Safety in 2008 and the Ashoka Fellowship for Social Entrepreneurship in 1997. His formal training has been in engineering and management. So please, let's welcome Ravi. Hi, Ravi.
Hi, Jesal.
So to begin the presentation today, next slide. The presentation and conversation today will focus on one of his extended and continuous project, Else All Will Be Still. Ravi will take us through his artistic and ecological inquiry that began several years ago as a nexus of encounters between the sea, the fisherman, and the relationship between man and nature. Can they coexist? We will take you through the series of works that form a part of Else All Will Be Still, and to make it intriguing, we have divided the presentation into 3 segments, each one exploring a distinctive aspect of Ravi's practice, from its performative mediums, philosophic compositions, artistic inquiries, and poetic notations that all synchronize to express a deep ecological concern. Next slide. To quote the artist, ecological time is mysterious. It never reveals itself. How does ecology change? In a dialectic Darwinian way, over many lifetimes before any adaptation occurs? Or has that all changed with the advent of man? Are we truly in the age of the sixth extinction as caused by humans, faster than mutation? This is surely not what is meant by evolution. Possibly this time, as a species, we have changed the order of business, the fine balance. Else all will be still is an ongoing project that is searching for this very fine balance through a matrix of encounters Ravi experienced at the fisherman village near Pondicherry. It is an inquiry into the increasing disparity between the relationship of the fisherman and the sea, and exploitation that impaired the sustainability of the local fishermen. Ravi, to begin the conversation today, could you please share with us the first instances and experiences at the village that led you to engage and pursue this project for several years?
Hi, Jesal. Firstly, thank you for inviting me, and thank you, Geeta from Sakshi, for also for inviting me. It's really a pleasure to be here and to speak about this project. Uh, uh, this was like many of my works, don't start off as projects, but are like chance encounters which grow into something. And I think something I feel energized by, and it becomes a deeper and deeper engagement. This started sometime when I visited this village, fisherman's village, close to Pondicherry, a few, about 5 or 7 kilometers before it. Uh, uh, and just as a visitor, just to look at things. And I spent some time there, and the more time I spent, the more intrigued I became.
Mm.
And there's always this constant many layers of inquiry which I've been engaging with at the very empirical level of what's going on around you, around me, in ecological terms, in terms of what's happening in in what kind of changes are taking place, what are the science behind that, etc. But at another level, there is also a deeper inquiry into the idea of nature itself, and that becomes like an onto epistemological kind of inquiry, which goes to the very heart of how we know something, how we know nature, how we relate to it, what is our cultural idea of it. So it is various levels through which I found myself entangled in this landscape. And there was a great degree of warmth, and one of the great challenges of working with communities is that the community has to accept you, to be working with them, or to be at least be there, not as a complete outsider. And I think I've always had the ease of doing that. It's sort of because I'm there because I really enjoy being there. I'm really curious, and uh, in this case also that curiosity has taken me to many adventures. I'll just quote one to you. Very early on, you saw a picture of a boat just before you showed that Kattumaran,
Yeah.
which incidentally is a 2,000-year-old boat. This boat itself is not 2,000 years old, but the boat design is 2,000 years old. It is made from matchwood stick from Kerala, and just is tied. And this is the classic single person. Incidentally, the word catamaran comes from Kattumaran. Kattumaran is tied wood in Tamil. So there are now fiberglass versions of this boat, because after the tsunami, many of them started being replaced on the main seafront with fiber. So I was taken by one of my who turned out became a friend fisherman. Selvam was taken out to the sea, and I said, I want to take pictures of you while you are fishing. And it's the boat, fiberglass boat doesn't look very different than this. It's just as precarious. And when you find yourself 2 kilometers in the sea, the world really changes. For suddenly you find yourself just next to these waves. And I was balancing myself with my camera in my hand and looking at this man who was fishing on the other end. And suddenly it struck me that, what if I fell in the sea? Because I didn't have any life jacket. I just had hopped onto it. And I asked him that, Selvam, if I fall down into the sea, will you save me? And he said, you can't swim. And that really shook me, said, my God, that the idea of fear and vulnerability, which that invokes in you. And suddenly from this secure land being, I became this vulnerable uh, ocean being with no capacity to survive in the ocean. So that's how these experiences really shape you, and to, I think, as an artist, which you can't do so easily as a scientist or as a researcher, is an artist, you start experiencing another layer of something. This
Mm.
vulnerability and this fear became so important in the way I navigated, or I understood what's going on, or became open to understanding in different ways. That that other. So I mean, I have a whole critique of the scientific method, but that's for another day.
So, Ravi, when was the first time you visited? And if you can just give us, some more insights into your first stay for, how many weeks, how many months, and I mean, how did you really engage into doing this project?
It's very hard to say. I think there's some places where I go which really uh, become like an exchange of energy,
Mm.
and it's hard to say what it is. It could be that just the way I was received there and I was allowed to be there, and just the way I was seeing things, just the way the landscape looked, and just what I was observing, somehow it became something I wanted to go back to. I remember in 2004, when I started doing work on the river in Delhi, which became this body of work called Alien Waters.
Mm.
Ended up going there 3 times a week, and
Okay.
I can't really explain why, except that it drew me. And the first time, I don't remember. I think I went for a few days, and I went back, and I went back, and I went back, and I
Mm.
kept going back. So I don't go back so often now because other things have taken over. But till 2017, I was going back quite regularly,
Okay.
and now it's become like, you know mm, uh, it's you feel very at home there in a sense.
That's nice.
And I also have a small shack there which I can go to. So it's become more like a place to be. And at some point, this you feel that you now uh, you exhaust yourself with the work, and you're saying, okay, now I'm doing something else. So the energy disappears as it appears, I think. So though I'm engaged in it at different levels, but somehow that work, this project, you can say, or this art project, has a completion. And I think it's to do with just some kind of energy exchange.
I guess another village is awaiting you.
Maybe. Let's
So,
see. I've been working on the desert now, so for the
okay.
last 2 years. Yeah.
Do you want to just briefly speak about it, or we can?
I come from Rajasthan, so there is my abandoned Haveli of my grandmother. Nobody lives there. But I remember I have childhood memories of the small room where my mother used to take me when I was a child. And I have somehow got into visiting and revisiting, and I have been exploring the idea of the desert.
Hmm.
It has, again, all these landscapes of the sea or the desert have so many layers in very temporal terms. So if you look at deep time, the desert is full of fossils from the sea. It was
Hmm.
part of the Indian plate, in subcontinent plate, which broke up from Madagascar,
Hmm.
and so it was under the sea, underwater at some point. And now it's become a big industrial zone. There's a lot of mining, there's nuclear testing, there's the Indira Gandhi Canal. I'm working with some friends who are scientists to do some research, but also this idea of memory and a diary of, of my memory of what water meant. So I've done a variety of kinds of works on that, and somehow that landscape has grabbed me for the moment. But in some sort of way, they're both about the
Yeah.
sand of the desert. And in fact, that's what I did the Yunchuan Biennial.
Hmm.
I made 2 rooms: the room of the seas and the room of the sands, of these two kind of things. So somehow there's a continuity as well. I think all artists have continuity in the work, in one way or the other. It's a continuous process.
So the series is about 4 works, 4 a.m. Engines. the rhizome and the lunar tide, which have the grid. Like these four works distinctly have the grid. I mean, till the screen doesn't come on, I thought we can start the conversation. So, I mean, it's a grid, which is bound by time and space and transforming the fluidity of life into mute mechanics that have further institutionalized their existence, making all life concrete. But yet, your photographic grid represents a performative gesture, expanding through time, and it's creating a flux of movement. I just thought of these lines when I was seeing your photographs. Am I the sea? Am I the wind? Am I the sand? Am I the turmoil? Am I the boat? Am I the traveler? Am I the machine? Am I the darkness? These are the questions that surface through when one looks at these four works. So, could I request you? I mean, could you explore and explain this ideology of the grid, which is there in these four works, and the conceptual framework, and and even the manner in which these were executed, especially the 4 a.m. and the lunar tide.
Yeah, I mean, I hope the images come up so we can, but just to speak about the grid, I've had a fascination for the grid. I mean, it's a very interesting organizing device. As a photographer who used to shoot film, and still does, the grid is also the contact sheet in some ways. So the grid is very much part of the photography experience.
Mm-hmm.
But the grid has been, for me, it's also like it being an objective observer. And
Mm.
so much has been written about the grid. I mean, about its relationship to you know uh, um, uh, to modernity, the modernity of the modern,
Mm.
about the idea of a typography, which I was been very influenced by the Beshers,
Mm.
from the Besher school, the Hilla and Bernd, the late Hilla and Bernd Besher. But many other photographers and artists have used as grid. But I come to it because I think to me it represents some kind of objective way of looking at something, and where there is movement, and there is also a distance. I distance myself from the observation in a
Mm.
sense. So I'm trying to be as objective an observer as I possibly can be. And it's so it's not, I mean, from my earlier documentary work, which is very much in the classical mode of the
Right.
documentary, this has been a movement for the last some years into distancing myself from my own eye, in a sense.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and the works, is one of my forays onto in the ocean, which with the fisherman friend. And as you can see, it's 4 a.m. is the time I've left with him, and you see the light change
Yeah.
from. And uh, so I'm really photographing him as the light changes. And I'm very precariously sort of perched on the boat, because the boat has almost no rim. So I'm balancing myself on
Yeah.
it. And this to me is one of the ideas which is very associated with ecology very closely, is the idea of labor.
Mm-hmm.
And labor as something repetitive, as a repetitive act of both human connection and human survival. But also, to me, this is an act which closely connects this very act of fishing connects
Mm-hmm.
everything about the fisherman to the sea.
Okay.
This is the particular act through which the word ecology appears to me. This is the beginning of the word ecology.
Okay.
This is where all culture, all action, all everything starts from here. This very act of of livelihood and culture through which this is taking place, where this is not this is just livelihood in a sense, but deeply entangled with culture and everything else. The other image, I don't know if I have it in this diary. uh, Lunar tide. uh, yeah, I have it here. So that's the image. Sorry. Now, these are 29 images
Hmm.
of the sea at night taken with a torchlight. So this really has uh, mm, mm, two or three ideas behind it. Of course, I don't normally speak about the ideas behind the image. The image should speak. But since we are asked, we are talking about it. This goes to the what I mentioned earlier, the onto epistemological concept of nature. What is nature? And this to me was when I was actually it started when I was looking at the sea at on a moonlit night, and you can only see so much of it. You cannot see beyond it.
Hmm.
And the idea came to me that I like the graphic quality of the moonlight shining on the tides coming in. And then on a moonless night, I used a torch to take these images, 29 images, 29 because they reference to the lunar cycle and a connection to the tide and the moon. And the light to me, at least, was to say that I can't really look beyond what I can see into the sea.
Hmm.
So what is the sea beyond what I can see? So this was the kind of question to myself, that I'm limited by my vision of what I see. And that's also a cultural and a language question.
Hmm.
So these two images are of distinct ideas. Then, of course, the two which you mentioned, rhizome or
Yeah.
rhizome, and the fourth one
Yes.
was on engines. The engines one is a particular idea of technology. And again, this is a key idea I work with when I think of ecology, labor, the idea of nature, technology. This image is really about, I don't know if you can see it because you're very small there. Uh, this is 20 engines. And there are distinct hierarchies on people who have engines on the boats and people who don't have engines on the boat. People who have engines on the boat are able to sell fish more like businessmen, and people who are doing solo fishing are more working in the livelihood framework. And these 20 engines are because these boats with engines can go into 20 kilometers, as
Okay.
against boat without engines which go for 2 kilometers, which is what my fisherman friend have. So this completely changes the idea of fishing from livelihood to some kind of capitalist transaction where you catch and you and so I was struck by, again, this typography of engines.
Hmm. Hmm.
And so this was my way of talking about it. And the fourth one, called rhizome, is a little differently conceptual because it talks about, again, it talks about the language of how somebody, the language of nature. So the question, there's a question behind this image,
Hmm.
which is that, is the sea I see the sea he sees? So when I'm talking about the sea to a fisherman, are we talking about the same thing?
Yeah.
And when I'm talking about the sea to the fisherman, I'm really talking about, uh, you know, uh, for me, the sea is beautiful, or it's stormy. It's just an abstract relationship to the sea, but they never use these words when they're talking about the sea. They use very functional and direct, immediate words. So
Hmm.
the sea is a very particular kind of entity or an object to which it's related. There's no abstraction in that. And I was
Right.
struck by this lack of abstraction as a lived reality, and brought home the question to me that maybe we just have a different. We're looking at two different things.
Right.
We cannot assume we are looking at the same thing. And again, when you say this is nature, what is this nature we are talking about? Is it the same nature as you see or I see, or I'm also caught in my whole language cultural episteme in that, and in my idea of the self also. So this is where the Sangam poetry work comes in, which we'll talk
Okay.
about a little later.
Yeah. So in Rhizome, there are these like placards, right, all over the sand, over the beach. So you've got these words written: port, harbor, engine, temple, money. So could you just share a little bit about this word, this whole
So
word game?
these words are words which in my diary, which I have these words. I was talking to the fisherman over a length of time. And these are the kind of words. This is my diary,
Okay.
and these are the words. And I wanted to see what do they think of the sea. What does the sea mean to them?
Mm.
And these are the words they mention, which is not the words I mentioned. So,
Okay.
this is a on-site installation. I made these placards, and the idea of the rhizome or the rhizome is these vertical shoots from a horizontal network of roots. So they're all interconnected and they're vertically. So that's the rhizome in botanical terms.
Hmm. Hmm.
So that's
Hmm.
the way I call it. So they're interconnected, the words,
Yes.
but you can't see the interconnections. And I talk of the sociology of capitalism in a sense of the
Right.
interconnection. Is more than the form is so interconnected you cannot separate it. Here the form is of another nature which we cannot see, but it's interconnected. These
Hmm.
words are interconnected through, and that's how the word rhizome comes through.
We'll now move to the next segment. These works, they are moving away from the grid, and they explore the poetic notations of Ravi's memories with each individual and object from the fisherman village. Uh, so Ravi terms these as diary images, as one has its own unique characteristics and relevance that is very personally engaging, like an intimate inquiry and relationship with the other as the self. These compositions are very stark, like archival documents of the animate and inanimate, blurring their distinctions. Roy also speaks of the contemporary philosopher Timothy Morton, who proposes that nature as a category should be discarded altogether and replaced by a network of relationships between animate and inanimate objects. So, Ravi, could you, uh, share with us this the philosophy of Timothy
So
Morton, and
yeah,
how you bring in the Tamil Sangam poetry?
yeah. So I mean, before I come to these philosophers who are talking about new ideas of nature, I just want to mention that for me, the camera is a primary device. It's like a brush to a painter,
Mm.
and it's with me all the time, and it's like taking notes for me.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
I also write, but it's part of my note taking. And so the diary which got published later, which the Guild Gallery published, that's a diary.
Yeah.
And that is the original diary. That's the original diary. That's the one I wrote in. That's my sort of diary. So this diary has photographs which are about my documentation over the years of what I'm seeing,
Hmm.
and I have a huge documentation of that. So there is this sort of this is these photographs are not I have not this time shown on the wall in a
Hmm.
gallery space, but the gallery photographs are a little more conceptual, and this I think they work much better in a book form, in a diary form, these photographs rather than on a wall. So that's how I distinguish. And because I want to mention this, because photography is now so many things.
Hmm.
It's
Hmm.
a very extensive language, and it's a very challenging language. And I think we have to embrace all its forms, uh, and they all embrace what photography is becoming and how it's reacting and how it's molding. But coming to this idea of Sangam poetry, I think that's what you
Hmm.
asked me.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean,
So Sangam poetry is really interesting because while I was there, I was looking at how this question of what do they think of the sea. I saw the rituals, I saw what the prayers they did, and so there was obviously another layer of understanding and relationship.
hmm.
And then I met this poetess, master poetess there, who led me to Sangam poetry. And Sangam poetry is from said to be around 300 BC. It's
Hmm.
from classical Tamil, which is a language which is lost now,
Hmm.
and it's only rediscovered in the early 20th century. And the two wonderful books on it. The main one being by Ramanujam,
Hmm.
Poems of Love and War, and another one, Love Stands Alone, by Thangappa. Both beautiful books, very differently translated, very beautifully translated. But there's a section of that called the Akam poetry, which is the poetry of the interior. And
Hmm.
the interior is about 5 landscapes,
Hmm.
including Nidal, which is the sea, and Korinji. So the 5 landscapes: mountain, agricultural land, desert, etc.
So
And they really,
I can
yeah,
just,
yeah,
Kurunji mountains, Mulai is the forests,
yeah,
Marutham is agricultural lands,
and
Neethal is
Palai.
sea, and Palai is the desert.
Desert, and there is no desert in Tamil Nadu. So desert is the absence of everything else. So that's the metaphor for it. But all these landscapes are connected to emotions, to loves, different kinds of love,
Mm.
and they have their flower and their plant and their. But the interesting thing is that the of course for example the love poetry in the agricultural land is about jealousy and about
Mm.
you
Mm.
know about uh, uh, not being not faithful, etc. And the
Mm.
poetry of the forest about love is about furtive meetings and chance encounters, and about the sea is about
Right.
waiting on the shore, waiting for your lover to come. Well, what I found really interesting about this poetry, and there's been commentary on this as well, so it's not like my reading alone, is that the, 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 the landscape is described as the background in which human life exists. It
Mm.
doesn't metaphorically say that, um, become the subject for human life. So it will not say that your eyes are like the door of the deer, but
Mm.
it will say that the landscape where the deer runs free, my lover comes from there. That kind of thing. So there's
Yeah.
a very sort of difference between nature as evoked as an object or a subject,
Mm.
as relational subject, to nature just existing in which life takes place.
Mm.
And
Mm.
somehow that it's an almost a non-anthropogenic way of looking at
Mm.
of the idea of the world around you. So
Mm.
this I found really fascinating, and it's of course very beautiful poetry.
Mm.
It's got a certain meter. It's very modernist. It's
Mm.
not sort of it's not very emotional in that sense, but very sort of the way the meter is very modernist and very beautiful.
Mm.
So I got very attracted to that, and I did a number of works where I brought this poetry into the work. But also there have been a number of other, when I first talked about the onto epistemological idea of nature, that what is nature, and this has become a very important question now, because
Mm.
especially one is looking at the something called the post-Anthropocene or the post-human,
Mm. Mm.
that in a post-human world, what happens to the non-human? How do you decenter the human
Mm.
in
Mm.
that world? And for example, what rights do non-humans have? And these are very difficult questions because all our systems, including our judicial and a jurisprudence system,
Mm.
are based on human interactions. So how does you give how does a non-human have agency?
Correct.
What does a parliament of humans and non-human look like, where everybody has right to the planet?
Right.
So this is the decentering the human. How do you decenter the human? There have been number of very interesting sort of challenging writings
Mm.
from the post-humanists and the new materialisms, or the object-oriented ontologies. These are sort of the
Mm.
I don't. They're hard to read. I don't claim to be expert in any of them. But for example, Timothy Morton, who claims to be an object-oriented ontologist, talks about that there is there is no nature. We just a relationship to objects, and that defines our sort of network of relationships. Or people like Karen Barad, who are talking about. She comes from a new material. She's a physicist, comes from feminist theory, but talks about that how does agency in nature appear?
Mm.
That for example, the COVID virus, is it caused by one interaction, or do we have a sociology of interactions
Mm.
through this whole gamut of institutions we have created, and we don't know what the triggers are? So that the agents, the agency is from within that the matter appears, the appearance of matter.
Mm.
So they're very interesting. And Donna Haraway's, of course, the classic talks of symbiosis and entanglements, and the Thuloscene. And so these are very interesting, challenging writers, and I think they help me to think conceptually broader than one would, because in the other world which I occupy,
Mm.
it's very sort of teleological and predetermined. They'll say that, okay, this is nature, we need to preserve biodiversity because biodiversity has ecosystem services, and
Mm.
we because they serve humanity. But the question is that biodiversity is only not meant to serve us. It
Right.
also exists in its own right. The river exists on its own self, not only for ourselves. So there are these kinds of now questions which are being raised, philosophical questions which are challenging the world we have created,
Mm,
where nature is outside of us. And the same thing when I the question of is the sea I see the sea
mm,
he sees, when I talk to my fishermen friends,
mm,
the question is, how do you translate, how do you think of, how do you imagine, how do you, so it's almost like a decolonizing of your own gaze,
mm.
that you have to you have to become more humble, and you have to start listening
Yeah.
to something which you've never listened to. And the act of listening is itself a political act. You have to reduce your power and say, actually there's much more I have to learn here. Humility,
Yeah.
almost like a Zen kind of way. So this reversal of the position,
Mm,
to me, is very important to reposition yourself vis-a-vis everything else, vis-a-vis nature, in a
mm,
sense. And of course, there are many indigenous, what we call indigenous people, who've had many other relationships. Now people are talking more and more about them.
mm.
Somehow the answers don't lie where Elon Musk and Bill Gates take us, because they're talking of geoengineering and a colony on Mars.
Mm.
Because nobody asks who's going to stay on that colony on Mars. Is it the migrant workers or people like him? But in a more challenging way, that we have to think that who we really are on this planet. What rights do we have, and do we have we really acknowledged that we may not know all the answers. We've been here less than 100,000 years. It's a 5 billion-year-old planet. So what is the future? So these are, I think, very important questions which some of these people are raising, and I'm really interested in trying to understand them better as an artist.
Mm.
Uh, and some of it creeps into my work, because these uncertainties crop up. I don't have any clear answers of anything anymore.
So of course these are very fundamental questions and very huge questions which cannot be answered by one human person, or we can't just arrive at an answer. But as an artist, as you just said that when you were at the village, you were listening to them. There was an entire process of becoming and living their lifestyles, or listening to what they really had to say. So not knowing answers, but what do you think people can do, or can try to do? Uh,
So
Basic things. I mean,
So I think the first thing is that I really think that we have to acknowledge that we don't know. I mean, everything we think we know, we don't know. We don't know climate change. You look at all the science of climate change, we don't know what the tipping points are.
mm,
We are
mm.
no better off than we were 30 years back in controlling it. Our temperatures are going up. We keep on talking of plastic. I'm talking of the things we talk about
Yeah,
when we
yeah,
talk about it.
very basic.
So we talk of plastics, right? Now, if you look at the plastic figures,
Mm,
uh, uh, we are recycling less than 9% of the global plastic.
mm,
And
mm.
everything we buy saying is recyclable. What does it mean? We're not recycling it. It's
Right.
just a thing we are saying. And we are producing more plastic than ever before. Even we are saying plastic is bad.
Mm,
So in the next, till the figures are 2050, we are producing about 350 million tons of plastic. By 2050, we'll be producing 1800 million tons of plastic, and we'll recycle less than 40% of it. So the question is, we have to acknowledge that we are really don't, and there's more species extinction today than ever before. So we don't know. We really don't know. And when we don't know, what do we do? You look towards finding answers. That means you start listening to other things. You start and listening in all your senses.
yeah.
And listening is, to me, a political posture. It means you say, I'm humble, please teach me. And if
Mm,
you go to the fisherman with saying, I don't, that I'm not here to give you a better engine, because that's what some people do.
yeah.
I'm not here to give you a better boat. I'm here to really understand, to learn from you. How have you survived for 2,000 years?
Mm,
And the last 2 months in COVID, the world has collapsed.
true.
In just 2 months, the whole economy has collapsed. Artists don't have things to eat now. Many artists. So can you imagine how fragile is the system we bank upon?
Yeah.
And we're constantly trying to reduce risk. And so I think I really feel that we don't know the answers, and we should be less arrogant and be more humble.
That's beautifully said. Um, so, talking about this, you did a series of work called the Ecological Manifesto,
Mm.
which is, uh, it's a catamaran is seen floating against a fathomless blue.
Yeah.
Um, and it's like, in a way, defying gravity and moving through an infinite space. And it's got a very faint text on the blue surface. I'll just
Yeah.
read a small part of it. The landscape is internal as well as external, Akam and Puram, as in ancient Sangam poetry. The divide is now complete. What is the sea in itself? What is the sound? What does it look like? Can we see it or know it beyond our eyes and ears? Can we hear? Can we ever know something in itself? Freedom and isolation go together.
It's very hard to explain the why one does something. It was to me an idea of playfulness and freeing something
Okay.
from its bare moorings. And this was my way of freeing, and it was also something which is, I mean, for me, hopeful.
Okay.
Freeing.
How is
And
it hopeful?
well, it's when you free something, it flies, and you
Right.
don't know. So there's something hopeful about this, sort of joyful for me. The three texts are the three. It's called the ecological manifesto because there are three texts
Hmm.
embossed in the three images,
Hmm.
which actually identify three main problems. When I
Hmm.
talk of institutions, how institutions which were meant to protect us,
Hmm.
have become so about themselves and not about protecting us that they refuse to see what's happening
Hmm.
outside, and they become impediments to change.
Hmm. Hmm.
How institutions can at some point become a problem.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
then I talk about the livelihood question, about how like the fisherman who lives in an ecosystem.
Hmm.
And uh, and I was very struck when I was with the fishermen that you go to a climate change meeting
Hmm.
and everybody's talking of the poor, that the
Hmm.
poor, it's like almost Gandhian saying we must imagine the poorest of the face before we take any action.
Yeah.
Everybody is doing the right rhetoric. They're all saying the right words in a sense, but there's some falsehood about that because there's no voice which this person or these people have there. In a sense, there's a big difference. But for them, when you talk to them about climate change, the fishermen, they have no clue because nobody's involved them in this whole discussion. Nobody's asked them, have you seen something change? So they've seen everything change. They've seen everything change, but they don't know from why it's happening. So there's such a broad front of change that
Hmm.
you cannot say it's because of this, this, and this. And for example, this village
Hmm.
had made these groins, these structures in the sea to prevent the sand from going away.
Hmm.
And those they had to make because in Pondicherry they had made this big port wall, and it
Hmm.
stopped all the sand. And when
Hmm.
the sand stops, the beaches erode, and
Okay.
it has a downstream effect for 30, 40 miles.
Hmm. Hmm.
So the beaches along they have all it. So when the beaches erode, just try and stop the beaches from eroding. So they made these structures which then created other beaches from erode. They cause the other beach. So it's a cascading effect
Hmm. Hmm.
because somebody has done something without understanding that when you make a small change
Hmm.
in this delicate balance, there's going to be such a cascading change.
Change.
So for the fishermen, something has changed. They don't know what's changed.
True.
They
True.
don't know. They don't know that because of that, nobody has sort of asked them.
Yeah.
But they are dealing with this wave of change, which most of us are.
Yeah.
We can say, oh, the air is dirty now. The monsoon is coming, or why is it raining so hard? We cannot identify that. So we are caught in the system
Hmm.
which
Hmm.
is so interlinked with each other.
Hmm.
at intrinsic levels, the actions are so interlinked that they're causing all these changes, and we have no way, no, we lose agency. We don't know what to do. So we end up, okay, let me clean the beach at least, because the beach has so much plastic. But I cannot stop the plastic. So there's somehow
Connected.
these big systems, these global interlinked institutional systems make us lose individual agency. So
Yeah.
while we feel if we have agency, the fisherman has very little agency in what the person can do about it. And this loss of agency to me is also how life has become so abstracted, how we have made people numbers or some kind of rhetoric. They're not real
Hmm.
people anymore. But
Hmm.
so if you go to them and ask him, he will tell you about the sea, which you can never imagine what the sea is. He'll
Hmm.
tell you where he'll find the fish. He'll tell you why the fish are not coming in. He'll tell you how the fish catch has changed. They know all this, but we don't know how to ask the question. We don't know how to understand what they know.
After you've said this, I don't think I can ask you anything.
Okay.
So, should we open it up to the participants if they have any questions? Or Vijaya, Vijaya, okay, Srinivasan, um, they've really enjoyed your session and not aware of your works. The question is, how have these influences forged your style? What is your distinctive style?
So it's a difficult question to answer because it's like translating visual language into text. If you have the time, if you don't mind looking at my website,
Hmm.
maybe then it might be easier for you to figure out if I have a distinct style at all. I'm
Hmm.
not claiming I do. But how do ideas inform work? I think ideas are crucial to work because
Hmm.
work is all about ideas. How they get translated could be many layers. They sit with you for a long time. Everything I am exposed to, then it somehow translates into work. I cannot exactly say how. I
Hmm.
think that those are processes which are very intuitive or learned intuitive. I cannot say. But I think that is part of the joy or the surprise of being an artist, because as an artist, you surprise yourself.
Hmm.
The project has no end point. It's just a discovery and exploration with yourself, I think.
There's one coming from Niyati Shinde,
Yeah.
who's, I mean, the question is that you are an artist and you're a curator. So if you could speak about how are they separate? I mean, of course, it's the
Yeah,
same
yeah.
concerns, but could you just speak about both?
I have till now, though I was going, and I'm sort of going to, but till now I've never curated a show on
Mm,
ecology or on nature. So,
mm, mm,
or my curation has been on other ideas of photography, because I'm deep lover of that medium. As a curator, I have a different approach. I'm not an artist
mm, mm,
I might have an artistic sort of way of looking at curatorial invitations, but I am more like in the service of the artist.
mm,
And after I decide I invite an artist, then my job is to make sure that the work of the artist is respectfully and shown to its best ability in,
mm,
in what makes sense. And the curator always tries to make some sense. It's like a reading, a trajectory into a certain thought process.
mm,
And I try and be as clear about it as possible. As I said, I don't really, uh, I'm not a typical curator. I've curated 3 or 4 times where people have invited me to curate, and I've curated, for example, the photography curation serendipity was
mm, mm,
looking at trends in photography, imagined documents, and um, the first one I forget the name, a similar
mm,
name,
mm,
but looking at new concerns about and how they're coming together, new ways of looking.
mm,
So in both these cases, I'm trying to be as objectively looking at other people's work as respectfully as possible.
mm, mm.
So to me,
Uh,
they are separate.
okay. Ratna Khanna is asking about the rose petal bathtub project.
Oh,
And if you could just, I mean, I liked the question, and I thought it would be good to bring in another work so that people can even, get familiar with your practice. So,
Uh,
and that to do with ecology.
yeah, no, it had to very little do with ecology. That it's one particular work I do. It's very personal work. Well,
Hmm.
people do remember it. It's atypical work. I'm looking at it's called Impossibility of Being Feminine. That work, and it's talking about stereotypes of how we depict ourselves and how uh, we are we stereotype ourselves into a certain kind of gaze of something.
Hmm.
So it's looking
Hmm.
at the gaze of how we see ourselves as
Hmm.
gendered beings. So uh, that work is taken in a bathtub, though. It's a series of
Okay.
31 images. I don't know what she wants me to say about that.
We're just getting a good question. So, how do you so easily move between regions and communities and places?
I don't so easily move. I have few projects, So I did work on the river, then I'm working. So there has to be some connection.
Hmm. Hmm.
I'm not. I mean, there are some. I'm working in the city all the time, but I don't so easily move. It's not so easy to move, and it has to be a two-way connect.
True.
It's not easy to work for me. It's not easy to work with the community per se
Hmm.
like that. It's a very sensitive thing.
Hmm.
It's not. I feel very shy of doing it as a project.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
it might develop into something.
Okay.
But if you look at my bodies of work, you don't find so many of them. There are a few of them.
There's a question from Nandita Raman. The question is, there was a reference to Timothy Morton,
Hmm,
who in turn is influenced heavily by Buddhism.
correct.
So, could you talk about other encounters with thinking and writing which comes out from within the Indian subcontinent?
There is a, I mean, there is a ontological idea of the self,
Hmm.
which is very much part of the Indian subcontinent, which is I think the Eastern self has a very clear demarcation of an idea of the self than the Western self has. And this
Hmm.
is well written about there. We find thousands of texts on this. It's a very
Hmm.
foundational idea and something I have engaged with personally for a long time.
Hmm.
And it influences my work.
Hmm.
There's a work I did on alien waters called The Shroud, and
Hmm.
it's a bodies of work called Immersion Emergence. It's like 24 pictures of me standing in a white cloth on the bank of the river.
Okay.
That is really thinking about what the self means.
Hmm. Hmm.
So ideas of the self are very much part of my exploration about nature.
Okay.
And Timothy Morton is a Buddhist, and he's a very hard author to read. Incidentally, he goes all over the place, very abstract in a sense. And his I think last book called Humankind or Humanism, I don't forget the exact name, where he declare. I think the first time he declares he's a Buddhist.
Okay.
I was always confused, if I'm not wrong, always confused when you read him that he's trying to mix an Eastern idea into a Western idea. And there
Hmm.
have been many other ways people who have done that, who have got influence, but uh, he particularly is
Yeah.
interesting in the way he tries to do that.
So, there's even a physicist, David Peat, who's written a lot on environment and ecology and these concerns, which we can obviously talk about later. Sanjeev Khandekar, he just unfortunately couldn't see the rhizome image, so we can just show it to him. And after listening, he could see relationship with Deleuze and Guattari. So, if you could, you know,
Yeah, I
speak.
mean, Guattari's Three Ecologies is a very influential text for sure, and Deleuze also talks about the self
Hmm.
in very interesting ways, and there are the new materialists are also influenced by him. So, in the manner in which I do understand them, there are some of them are very difficult philosophers to understand in entirety. I'm not a philosopher, but I am aware of the relationships
Hmm.
with them, and I think uh, including the contemporary philosophers I mentioned, people like Haraway or Barad or you know, or anthropologists like
Hmm.
Anna Singh, who writes about this continuity of entanglement with with capitalism in a sense. These are people which are who are, I find, very interesting, and they influence the way I think, and hence they influence what is it I'm trying to say through my work. Do you want to see the resume work? I don't know if Sanjeev Khandetar
I
is.
can show it to him. I have it here.
Yeah, yeah,
We'll take one last question, Ravi.
yeah,
It's from Tanya Vaidya.
yeah.
Do
Done.
you think nature-based communities will have more agency post-COVID world?
Hard to say. We are so we are so quickly going back to the old normal.
Hmm.
So I'm not sure what lasting influence it's going to have. Only time will tell what lasting influence it will have. I think that uh, the COVID certainly raises many questions,
Hmm.
including about uh, what is co-evolution, what is contaminant, what does contaminant mean, for example. Something which is fine for the bad is contaminant to us in a sense, raises many fundamental questions to my mind. But I don't think that unless there's a long-term vulnerability we feel,
Hmm.
and you don't know how many more COVIDs will be, because there's
Hmm.
where this SARS-2 came from, there are a host of other coronaviruses which
Hmm.
are probably there. So unless we are we deal with this in some kind of vulnerability and uncertainty, I don't think we're going to move very easily from the structures we are part of.
Yeah.
They might get even worse in the short run, because you can see new authoritarianism coming in. We've done more environmental clearances in the last few months than we have for a long time. So
Hmm.
while we say, oh, the air is cleaner, but we are now making roads to forests and to protected areas, and making clearing dams in the Brahmaputra. And so I think lots of stuff is going on which is in the old mold,
Hmm.
and we can only think what there are many other ruptures which might happen in the future. Artificial intelligence is one of them. What does that post-human look? What
Yeah.
does the bionic human look like? So I don't know what. It's very speculative,
Hmm.
and maybe we should turn to science fiction a bit.
For
But
that,
right now we are still struggling, I think. I don't think 2 months is long enough to.
to make this have this dualization.
I don't know. I mean, we can all hope that, but I don't think anything has really fundamentally changed.
True. Um, Sakshi Gupta thanks you. She's thanking you for a wonderful presentation,
Hmm.
and we can end with this last thing. She wants to know about your current series, Trace City.
So, did you share those images? I don't know.
Oh, I didn't actually.
Okay, so okay, so this is from the website then.
Yeah.
Okay, no. So, Tracity is not a current; it's an ongoing thing.
Okay.
Every photographer has something which they just keep on doing. So,
Okay.
I'm no different. I keep on doing this, and it's just an ongoing thing. I'm looking at. I'm interested in interstitial spaces in the city.
Hmm.
My city kind of thing, the city which draws me. So uh, that's my project.
Okay.
It has a body of images. One day it'll appear in some place, I think.
I am going to be uploading it.
Yeah. So
Send it.
but
Yeah.
one day as a body it'll appear. I have just 2 or 3 of these parallel things going on, like every photographer has.
Right.
Not much different.
So thank you, Ravi, and thank you, everyone.